So, in the next few minutes, I want to convince you that it's possible to change minds. Imagine this scenario. You're at the computer, it's 3 a.m., you're involved in yet another unproductive online battle because someone is wrong on the internet. You know, our ability to communicate is great, but our ability to agree and change minds remains elusive. Is it possible to change minds? I think it is, because I've seen it over and over again in one particular area, language. I've seen it in the linguistics classes I teach, I've seen it on my podcast, Talk the Talk, on RTR-FM, and I've seen it on the Speakeasy, a talkback radio show that I do on ABC Radio Perth. I talk to a lot of people about language, and I've been doing it for the better part of 2 decades. And in that time, I've noticed something. Language makes people grumpy and concerned and insecure, but often grumpy. So what I do in my work is I try to help people ungrump, help them be less grumpy about language and learn to enjoy it. And in my work in ungrumping, I use 2 insights that you've probably heard before. It's normal for language to change over time, and it's normal for people to use language differently. These 2 insights are key to ungrumping language and changing minds. Now, you might not feel like language is like politics or religion or the other messy stuff that we fight about, but I think that language is a great test bed for changing minds. After all, language is very political. Language is intensely personal. Language is a proxy for a lot of other things about us, like age and sex and social class. And language is one way that we form and maintain social groups, which is something that we do with politics, religion, and all the other messy stuff. And even if you think you're woke AF, those of you who understood that, could you please explain it to those that didn't? Would you please? Thanks. Even if you think you're pretty progressive, maybe sometimes your language attitudes might not be so much so. For instance, when I started this talk, the very first word I said was, so. Starting a sentence with so is one of the biggest complaints that I hear about language. Why are people starting a sentence with so? I think so is a great way to start a sentence. Usually so tells your listener, what I'm saying now is the result of what I said before. But it even works when you haven't said anything. It clears the table. It says, listen, this is important. Another thing that gets people grumpy about language is the word versing. Oh, okay, audible groans from the audience. There we go. If you've heard a bunch of kids playing a game, you might hear one of them say, not I'll oppose you or I'll go up against you, but I'll verse you. Who's heard it? Okay. Who gets annoyed by it? Okay, thank you for your honesty. Well, if that gets you grumpy, then this one will really get you going. It's just one word. Okay. A lot of people have that reaction to use. I don't know why. I think it's great. I'm a big fan of use. I love use. I love use. There's a story behind use. The story is that, it's complicated, but here's the simple version. It used to be that we had thou for one person and you for multiple people. Over time, we stopped saying thou, and you took over the singular and the plural. But collectively, we never got over the sense that something was missing, right? In that second person plural spot. And we've tried a lot of things to fill that gap. Some people go for y'all, which is great, right? Some people go for you lot or you guys. Some people even go for yins, which is a contraction of you ones. But I think use is great. It's just you and a plural S, right? What could be simpler? It's an elegant solution to an ancient problem. So what's the problem if we get a little bit grumpy about language every once in a while? Well, the problem is that it's not about language. It's about the people who use language. So if you say that you can't stand use, your real target might not be the word use. It might be the people who use. Right? Yeah. Think about it. If someone uses use with you, do they fall a little bit in your esteem? Be honest. Think about this to yourself. What if it were an employment situation? Would that be a disqualifier? And why? This is a small example, but it comes up in lots and lots of places. I know lots of people who are teachers of English as a second language, but their first language isn't English. They've had to do the work of learning English and getting the teacher training. They're good teachers, but they get passed over for employment sometimes because they don't sound like me. They don't sound like you. Should someone have to sound like me to be successful? I'm not saying that everybody has to use language differently. I'm not saying that every way of using language is okay in every situation. But when people feel like they have to speak with a voice that isn't authentically their own, we all have a problem. So, what do? How can we ungrump language and change minds? I have some suggestions based on my extensive experience, and if you want to transplant these ideas to changing people's minds in other areas, please go ahead. My first suggestion: find common ground. People who get grumpy about language sometimes really like language, like I do. They're just concerned about it. Well, this is misplaced concern. There's heaps of evidence to show that language is not being harmed just because people say there's heaps of evidence instead of there are heaps of evidence. And when someone comes to me with concerns about using language right, first I try to understand those concerns. And I usually say something like, you know what, I get that, because I like doing things the right way too. The good news about language, be sure to share the good news. The good news is, with language, there's a lot of right ways to do it. My second suggestion: tell a better story. A lot of times people believe things because it's part of a narrative that gives them a place. And for language, the narrative is something like, I am an educated person who uses language properly. But we can tell better stories. For versing, the story goes like this. We, in English, borrowed the Latin preposition versus, against. But over time, English speakers started looking at that S on the end and saying, well, what's that about? And they had a very creative solution. If he versus her, then maybe I could verse you? And so a new English verb was born out of a Latin preposition. That's very unusual. That doesn't happen a lot, and that is a story worth sharing. My third suggestion: build community. Many times people believe the things they do because they're part of a community that reinforces those ideas. Well, we can build community too. For Talk the Talk, we have built a vibrant and dynamic online community full of great people who love to find out and share good ideas about language. Their input feeds the show. We really couldn't do what we do without them. And for the Speakeasy, there are so many great people who give questions and comments. I will say that it's been a process. At first, it felt like we were sometimes fighting the audience, but over time, I've noticed a change in the temperature, in the culture of the show. Now people are more likely to share how they use language and less likely to engage in unproductive grumping. And sometimes, minds are changed. Here's an email I got from a listener. I did want you to know that from listening to you, you've taken the, I want to say anger, but that's not what I feel. It's more frustration away when I hear people misspeaking. Your wise words have calmed me. I call that a win. Language ungrumping works. So, maybe I haven't changed your mind about so or versing or even use, but I hope that you'll take a minute and maybe try to incorporate some of these suggestions about ungrumping your language. It's easy to do. It makes language so much more enjoyable, and you could just make the world a slightly better place. When someone uses use with use, they're really sharing something about themselves, about their history, their community, their identity. You can do all of that with one word, and those are aspects of the human adventure that language does really well. So, thank yous.